Hi, my name is Paul, and I'm pastor at Livingstone's Church, and I'm trying to play with YouTube a little bit. I've been making some Jordan Peterson videos. I've been making videos for the Freddie and Paul show for a while, and while I'm learning this, I thought, well, I might as well play around with this and see if some of this can be a part of my sermon prep for Sunday. And so I thought I'd call this video a rough draft. I work on my sermon during the week, and then I preach it on Sunday. And I often write a blog post that, goes through, it's kind of a rough draft of the sermon. But I thought, now that I'm getting used to talking into this strange computer camera, I thought I might try running through my sermon this way. And now I know some of my members at church may watch this, and so don't be surprised or afraid or disgusted or alarmed if things change between now and Sunday. That's usually part of my normal sermon process. I work on this during the week, and Sunday morning I do the polishing draft, and sometimes things get cut. And so don't be alarmed about the time, because part of this will be timing as well. So why don't we begin? And my first question is, what is this? And now it's a light bulb. Now, what is this? It's very interesting when you put a light bulb on somebody's head. It immediately connotes idea. And in fact, if you look at, see, already I'm thinking I should, okay, just did a new thing. I just dropped in a slide. See, this is very much a rough draft. I'm still putting the draft together. If you just go to do a Google image search and you search idea, look how many of these ideas come up as light bulbs. Now, isn't that interesting? And that's almost the definition of, I don't know, a meme or maybe even an archetype, that this shining bulb communicates to us this idea of idea. Now this so then I wondered about this, and so I thought, where did this come from? And a number of websites say that this became a cliche almost as soon as it was invented. And in the 20s, when they were doing silent films, Felix the Cat, it first came out, Felix the Cat. Now, I looked through a bunch of Felix the Cat videos, and I couldn't find actually a light bulb used for him, but that sent me in a different direction. And it's very interesting, again, with some of the Jordan Peterson videos I've been doing, I'm really thinking about how things develop, how representations develop, low resolution versus high resolution. The very first Felix the Cat video was called Feline Follies, and it's very interesting because if you look at this cat, he just kind of looks like a normal cat. And if you also watch the video, you'll notice that, text pops up, and now animation is brand new here, and the animators are, they're basically doing flip books here with these short animations, and they're really learning the language and trying to figure out the new medium, again, in some ways the way I'm trying to figure out YouTube and what this new medium really is. So here's this story about a cat, and there's meow, and also in the early Felix the Cat videos, he's called Master Tom. He's not even called Felix. And so Master Tom, who scalps unwary mice and breaks feline hearts with equal assurances, and Dispatch meets Miss Kitty White and capitulates at sight. And so here he gets ready, and this is a good opportunity to see what Felix looks like. And again, he looks like a normal cat. Now often certain features are exaggerated, but again, what you see in this video is that the animators, they're doing things here, but they don't trust that people will catch it, so they add all of these words. And what we're going to see in that later, as the art develops and as the medium develops, the animators will learn new ways of communicating. And so one of the things that you see often is, we know where Felix is looking because they draw these little dotted lines to things. And so often I look at that and say, you don't need these dotted lines, but maybe you do. But remember, this is very early days in animation. And then the question mark. And notice how in this early film in 1922, they even dotted the lines to the question mark as if we're not going to get it. And yet the question mark is an interesting example because if you know how to read and you understand punctuation, there's a question mark. It's a very low resolution, very fast way to communicate to us what's in the mind of Felix. Now, Here's one from a bunch of these that I found on YouTube. Didn't give the specific date, but here's one where obviously he's thinking about a female cat. But what I want you to notice here is how much Felix has changed. Felix is now almost all head, and with his head, he's got a big mouth, but he's almost all eyes, because eyes are the way that we communicate emotion. And if you look at studies, sometimes you'll have pictures on the internet about smiling. We don't smile with our mouth, we smile with our eyes. And so then obviously in the evolution of animation, Walt Disney, if you know anything about the history of Disney, Disney was trying to, Felix the cat was just burning up the place. Everyone loved Felix, so what does Disney do? Well, he can't do a cat, he does a mouse, but for the most part, the mouse is just like the cat, except he's got round ears instead of pointy, and everything else, the eyes, the mouth, the shape of the mouse, it's pretty much all the same, and this is where we get bing. But again, the question, why does this light, why does this shining light communicate ideas? Now, when you see this, you say right away, well, here's two guys. One has an idea, and they throw in the gesture with the hand, and the other throws in that with the question mark. But even look at our speech, because this goes beyond this. If someone would say to you, would you please enlighten me? Now, you know what that means, but right away, the idea of light, well, what does light really communicate in that sentence? Or even the idea, I have a bright idea. So we not only use light for idea in terms of pictures, we use it in terms of other things. Now this is really interesting, because idea is about as immaterial a thing as you can imagine. And I even thought of this. Obviously, I can't do it on the YouTube video, but part of my ideas was put a blindfold on one of my members. I usually pick on Reggie, because Reggie's such a good sport and he's always up for some fun and games. But if I would put blindfolds on Reggie and have him walk around, if I did a children's church sermon, this is probably what I'd do with it. Have him walk around and he'd bump into chairs and people would touch him because he's walking around in darkness. And so right away we have this very deep, very intuitive sense of light and darkness. And so when we say, would you enlighten me, what we're asking is, would you turn the light on and let me see the truth? And then that prompted me the question, well, what did we do before Thomas Edison? Because, of course, light bulbs haven't been around that often. Psalm 119, verse 105. Your word is a lamp for my feet and a light on my path. Now, Psalm 119 is all about the Torah, or the law of God, in the first 5 books of the Old Testament. And notice how the psalmist phrases this and puts this together. Your Torah, your law, your revelation is a lamp for my feet. I know how to live because you have directed my path. And it's a light for my path. And you very quickly, just within this one verse, get the sense of communication where this world is darkness, and we don't know what's going on. And again, as a pastor, I hear this all the time from people. In our prayer requests, people, what's going to happen in the future? What's going to happen in the stock market? What's going to happen with my 401k? What's gonna happen with all of these things? Now I might change around my slides, and so I just actually changed around my slides. I'm kind of liking this rough draft thing. It's helping me to talk through the sermon and make some edits as I go. Why are the words light in the darkness? Why are words light in the darkness of chaos? And here's when chaotic darkness comes in. When you have cancer. Or when someone comes to you and says, I'm with the IRS. I know many people, even if they've heard that these telemarketing phone calls are fraudulent, people calling, I'm the IRS and I'm going to be there. Thousands, hundreds, or maybe thousands of people fall for this. Even on the news, the IRS will never call. Once you say IRS, people just, boom, It's chaos. They don't know what to do. And what can dispel the darkness? Or your spouse comes to you and says, I want a divorce. Boom. Chaos. The Twin Towers have fallen. I remember that moment turning on the TV. I grew up outside of New York. I had been to the towers often, and I saw the TV. The Twin Towers had fallen, and I just couldn't get it through my head. Or if the news comes by, a nuclear detonation. The stock market has collapsed. An earthquake measuring in a city where you have loved ones. Your word is a lamp unto my feet in a dark place and a light unto my path. Chaos comes in a lot of forms, and those of you who know me and Living Stones know some of our ministry, and some of you know this man here because, you know, he's in jail right now, but you know, we're friends, and you know, I lived with this kind of thing on and off for about 6 years, and one of the things that I often reflected on was the fact that his chaos was out there in the open, and for all of us to see. And so I remember one day that I step out of my office, and here he is sitting there, and he's got this white coat on, and he's got, well, they're women's sunglasses, but a fashionable pair of sunglasses. And if you knew Daniel, he would be out there philosophizing or talking, and there he is sitting in the midst of chaos. And I thought, this is a picture of us. And again, if you knew Daniel, he's a devout Mormon, and so often we would talk about, you know, his living in chaos in the midst of not only the physical world, but his Mormon faith and all that meant. And I still, you know, one of the things after he got hauled off to jail was I have his Bible here yet. And how often he would look for a Bible, and how excited he was to have one. Thy word is a lamp unto my feet and a light unto my path. And of course, just reading it isn't enough. Well, last week we looked at John the Baptist, and in last week's sermon we talked a lot about how John the Baptist, what does it mean that John the Baptist prepares the way? That's a very complicated idea. Well, what happens in this week's text, which is the beginning of the Gospel of John, one of the things you notice very quickly is that John the Baptist figures prominently in all four Gospels in terms of preparing the way. And biblical scholars have long asked, now, why is this? Because part of the thing is that for people today, Jesus is a very big deal and John is a very small deal. But when Jesus, you know, kind of first comes on the scene, John the Baptist was a rock star. John the Baptist was a celebrity. Everyone knew who John the Baptist was. And so right away it seems that the gospel writers, you know, had to make sense of the relationship between Jesus and John the Baptist. And so the Gospel of Mark just launches right into it, but the Gospel of John does something really interesting. What it in a sense does is begins with a little bit of a song. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was with God in the beginning. Through him all things were made. Without him nothing was made that has been made. In him was life, and that life was the light of all mankind. Light shines in the darkness, and the darkness does not overcome it. And most scholars will look at that and say, that's a song. That might have even been a hymn that very early Christians were singing. And so John starts his gospel with that, and then switches. There was a man sent from God whose name was John. He made himself a witness to testify concerning the light, so that through him all might believe. He himself was not the light, and he came only as a witness to the light. And this has launched a number of scholars into speculating that maybe part of what was beyond this for the author of the Gospel of John was to tension between the disciples of John and the disciples of Jesus, and obviously we don't know that. That could very well have been, but it's very interesting that this is where he starts, and then we go back to the hymn. The true light that gives light to everyone was coming into the world. He was in the world, and through him, and though the world was made through him, the world did not recognize him. Now, this part might not be a song because it's not really worded like as a song, like what was at the very top. He came to what was his own, but his own did not receive him. Yet to all who did receive him, to those who believed in his name, he gave the right to become children of God, children not born of natural descent, nor of human decision, nor of husband's will, but born of God. The Word became flesh. Now, this might again be a song. Again, we don't know. This is speculation. The Word became flesh and made its dwelling among us. And the language there is he tabernacled among us. And so what John is doing, and we're not going to get into all of this right now, what John is doing is connecting them back to Exodus. And what John is doing in this prologue is connecting his gospel to all of these long stories, and he's tying Jesus into the story, and he's locating Jesus in the story. The Word became flesh, and he made his dwelling among us. We have seen his glory, the glory of the one and only Son who came from the Father, full of grace and truth. And then whoop, back to John. John testified concerning him. He cried out, "This is the one I spoke about when I said, 'He who comes after me surpassed me because he was before me.'" Now, it's very interesting that you might say, yeah, well, this is a debate between John's apostles and Jesus' disciples. But what is said here came true, that in fact John has diminished and Jesus has, continues to grow. Out of his fullness we have all received grace in place of grace already given. For the law was given through Moses. Grace and truth came through Jesus Christ. And again, this is another theme in the gospel, that Jesus surpasses Moses, that Jesus surpasses the prophets. For the law was given through Moses, grace and truth through Jesus Christ. No one has seen God but the one and only Son, who is himself God and is in closest relationship with the Father, has made him known. Now, what's fascinating about this is how the Greek lays this out, because people have long noted that. Another edit. Scholars have long noted that the language changes here in the transition between verse 5 and 6. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was God, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. All this is. In the beginning, ha logos, kai ha logos, and it's all is, and this is grabbing back to Exodus. I am what I am. And this gets back into the name of God. And obviously John's Jewish audience would have identified this immediely. And then the language changes when it gets to verse 6, that a man came sent from God, his name was John. And all of the verbs switch from all of the is verbs to the other verbs that he's using of John. Now, I read through the whole thing, so I'll zip through this. Now this use of the word logos is a fascinating thing, and it has a long history. It had a long history in Greek philosophy, and this probably didn't grab John's original audience the way it grabbed later generations of Christians who read this. Even though John's gospel seemed to be the traditional site in Ephesus, which was also where Heraclitus, really riffed on this logos, and he strived to explain that the continuing Heraclitus had this idea of flux in the universe, and how logos gave it visible order. Logos is what made the world cosmos. And now for the Stoics too. The Stoics were one of the large communities. They were one of the large rival Greek philosophies of the day. And logos was a large theme. But for Stoics, logos was the mind of God, and a rather pantheistic God who penetrated all things, guiding, controlling, and directing all things. And Philo, who was a who was a Jewish philosopher, who was very much into Plato, really used this idea of logos. Now this is before John. He really used this idea of logos to try to find a place where the Greeks and the Jews could meet. And now Raymond Brown, who put this together, notes that all of this, in fact, comes from wisdom literature in the Old Testament. You have the deep blending of the prologue with motifs of Genesis 1 through 3 and all of those things, and wisdom literature. And, to the point that all of this is fairly well known. And when one reads the hymn of the prologue and compares it to the Hellenistic parallels suggested above, one realizes the truth of Augustine's remark that while he has found the equivalent of most Christian doctrines in pagan authors, there is one thing that he's never read in them: that the Word becomes flesh. And this is a fascinating idea because, again, Word, just as light in a literal dark room, Word in the midst of the Word of truth in the midst of chaotic darkness dispels the darkness. Now we see this in the Old Testament. By the word of the Lord the heavens were made, their starry hosts by the breath of his mouth. He gathered the waters of the sea into jars. He put the deeps into storehouses. Let all the earth fear the Lord. Let all the people of the world revere him. For he spoke, and it came to be. He commanded, and it stood firm. And this is where you get this Genesis 1 picture of light out of darkness. Isaiah 55, come all you who are thirsty, come to the waters, and you who have no money, come buy and eat. Come buy wine and milk without money and without cost. Why spend money on what is not bread, and your labor on what does not satisfy? Listen to me, and eat what is good, and you will delight in the richest of fare. Give ear and come to me. Listen, that you may live. I will make an everlasting covenant with you, my faithful love promised to David. See, I have made him a witness to the people, ruler and commander of the people. Surely you will summon nations you do not know. Nations you do not know will come running to you because of the Lord your God, the Holy One of Israel, for he was endowed you with splendor. Again, more light. Seek the Lord while he may be found. Call on him while he is near. Let the wicked forsake their ways, and unrighteousness their thoughts. Again, voicing, calling. Remember when Moses comes down from Sinai, he shines. I should probably put that in earlier. Let them turn to the Lord, for he will have mercy on him. And you get the sense that not only does the word of the Lord bring creation into being, but our words connect with him. For my thoughts are not your thoughts, neither are your ways my ways, declares the Lord. As the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways, and my thoughts than your thoughts. As the rain and the snow come down from heaven and do not return to it without watering the earth and making it bud and flourish, so it yields seed for the sower and bread for the eater, so is my word that goes out from my mouth. It will not return to me empty, but will accomplish what I desire and achieve the purpose that I sent it. You will go out in joy and be led forth in peace. The mountains and hills will burst into song before you, and the trees of the field will clap their hands. Instead of the thorn bush will grow the juniper. Instead of the briars, the myrtle will grow. This will be for the Lord's renown, an everlasting sign that will endure forever. Now, one of the things that I found in Felix that really caught my attention was this little scene where again the representation above him, which is an exclamation point. Again, I didn't find the light bulb, but here there's a keyhole that's like an exclamation point, and in a sense the logos, the idea, the thought, and it's a silent movie, so Felix doesn't talk, but the exclamation becomes flesh in a sense, and well, kind of opposite flesh, because it becomes a hole that he goes through, and so the logos becomes flesh, which is again Advent, the incarnation. Why John begins here and says the organizing principle that brought the world into being, The Word of God, his acting part. There's also an interesting thing that goes on in Aramaic, memra. In Aramaic is the word for word, but often you find these quotations in Exodus where it stands in for God. That the Word becomes flesh, becomes his image. And if we were going to go through Genesis 1, we would talk about the image, becomes his stand-in, becomes his embodiment in this world of darkness. And John points to the light. Now, my question for you is, where's the chaotic darkness in your life? And what so often happens with this is we might get excited about this and say, oh, okay, I get it. Jesus is my flashlight. And I can wield Jesus, and when chaos comes in, when the stock market crashes, when the doctor says I have cancer, that I can take Jesus and bring light into my darkness. And on one hand, I say, absolutely you should cry out to Jesus. But Jesus is not a flashlight that you can wield. We implicitly want to do what Felix does there and take this exclamation point and be able to wield it. And this is called magic. And what we see in the Gospels is that people were attracted to Jesus and they wanted to be with him. And they wanted to be with him because they saw him heal the sick and raise the dead and feed the multitude. And then later in the Gospel of John, Jesus says to them, you're just following me because you want stuff. And then many leave. And then he tells them something crazy. Unless you eat my flesh and drink my blood, you can have no part of me. And people run away from that. These are horrible things to say. And his disciples stay with him. And Jesus says, are you going to run off too? And what does Peter say? He says, you have the words of life. So where else are we going to find them? So what happens, and then even his disciples will run and hide when the heat comes, even though Peter says, no matter what happens, I will stay with you. And then from noon to 3 in the afternoon, darkness comes over the land when Jesus is being crucified. It seems like the light is going out. About 3 in the afternoon with 3 hours of darkness. About 3 in the afternoon, Jesus cries out in a loud voice, Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani, which means, my God, why have you forsaken me? In the moments of our misery, this is where our hearts go. But this is the point of Jesus' crucifixion. He came not to bring judgment, but to bear judgment. And if you listened to the sermon last week about John the Baptist, that message you'll get in that. But on the first day of the week, while it was still dark, why does John say that? Because we're living in the darkness. The light is shining and the darkness can't overcome it. John has receded, but Jesus has gone out. While it is still dark, Mary Magdalene went to the tomb and saw the stone. That evening, on the first day of the week when the disciples were together with the doors locked for fear of the Jews, Jesus came and stood among them in the darkness. And then early in the morning when he comes to them in John 21, early in the morning, and so, the disciples have been fishing in the darkness all night long. Jesus comes and, of course, then gives Peter the pronouncement, feed my lambs, but he makes a meal for them. So what does that say about the chaos and the darkness and the logos and where we stand in the story in terms of our belief? Now, gratitude. Now, if you're new here, you might notice I end many of my sermons with misery, deliverance, gratitude, and this is the basic structure of the Heidelberg Catechism. One of our probably our denomination's favorite doctrinal statement. But so what the dance of the gospel is that, and how we experience it, is that we realize our misery, we realize our impotence, we realize our powerlessness, and we even realize that Jesus is not an idol that we can grab onto or a flashlight that we can deploy. Jesus is in fact our brother who has gone before us into the darkness and bears darkness for us. And that's misery. And then deliverance, he comes and he pays the price. He goes under the knife. He bears the judgment of God, and he is raised again on the third day. And we live in this twilight period. We live early in the morning. And then the question is, well, what will we do? He is the light that gives darkness. He is the logos that speaks order out of chaos into being. Witness to the light, even in the darkness. And that is in fact exactly the image of Jesus on the cross. He is witnessing to the light in the darkness, and the darkness bears on him but does not overcome it. Witness to the light, even as it appears the darkness is crushing it. Word becomes flesh, his flesh, and as we take up our cross and follow him, our flesh. And just one final word. You are the light of the world. A town built on a hill cannot be hidden. Neither do people light a lamp and put it under a bowl. Instead, they put it on a stand, and it gives light to everyone in the house. In the same way, let your light shine before others, that they may see your good deeds and glorify your Father in heaven. So that's the end of this rough draft. I can't quite see how long it took. I had some extras in there. I did some editing. So again, if you've enjoyed this, leave a comment. Either I'm going to post this on my Facebook page. Leave a comment on YouTube or on Facebook, and let me know what you think. And if in fact you want to have some editing input in my sermon for Sunday, go ahead. I like pushback and feedback, and I'll certainly listen to you. So thanks for watching.